And I am pleased to yield 5 minutes to the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and many thanks to our panelists today. On August 3rd, 2019, El Paso was in the crosshairs. We were at the intersection of America's hate epidemic, fueled by anti-immigrant rhetoric, rhetoric that is used, unfortunately, by colleagues of mine, and also fueled by the gun violence epidemic. And yes, ma'am, it's an epidemic. It was the deadliest targeted attack on Latinos in modern American history, an attack that created an entire region of gun violence survivors. Not just the victims and the survivors, but the healthcare professionals, the social workers, the therapists, the law enforcement officers, the journalists, and so many, literally hundreds of thousands of others in our region, suffering now from secondary trauma that is ongoing. And the ongoing consequences of this kind of attack doesn't just include physical or mental health consequences, long-lasting, enduring consequences, but financial consequences as well. Just as an example, El Paso local taxpayers are funding both the prosecution and the public defense leading up to and during the trial process of the domestic terrorist who committed this horrific attack. That process, which includes jailing the domestic terrorist, all the experts required for both his prosecution and his defense, this will cost taxpayers in my community, the same people who are gun violence survivors, they will now have to pay over $1 million as a result. This is just on the judicial process alone. This doesn't include the therapy. This doesn't include the ongoing surgeries and physical therapy, everything associated with the consequences of that attack. Immediately after that, my governor, Greg Abbott, came into my community, spoke with some of the survivors, and he promised that there would be action. But what has been an example of a miserable failure of leadership, he has moved in the other direction. And we've heard during this hearing about permitless carry that has been approved in the state legislature. It feels as though for leaders, Republican leaders in my state, there isn't enough bloodshed and misery across the board. Here in Congress, it is so incredibly frustrating to hear thoughts and prayers coming from my Republican colleagues, to hear them begin hearings with, oh, my sympathies to the families, but, and there's always a but. And I don't know when we will finally get to the solutions, which are so clear-cut, so easy, and so supported by a broad swath of American voters and communities all over the country. In fact, too frequently my colleagues are eager to continue to fuel the flames of division instead of partnering with us on common sense solutions. Gun violence prevention laws work. From 1994 to 2004, there was a 25% decrease in gun massacres and a 40% decrease in fatalities associated with assault weapons. Why? Because the federal assault weapons ban was in effect. They work. The statistics show it. And I wish that we didn't have another party that was so detached from the truth, but we have one. And so this is why we can't seem to make progress. Pastor Grady, as I mentioned, there are long-standing consequences and effects that survivors have to face. Can you share with us what you and Michelle have had to live with, Michelle and your wife have had to live with since the massacre in 2019?
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. Yes, we've had to deal with a myriad of issues of from the mass shooting, the hospital visits, the surgeries, the psychological, the emotional trauma, trying to make sense out of what actually happened here in the city of El Paso and why hatred seemed to be the call word of that particular day. We've had to struggle with watch Michelle as she had to rehabilitate, and she's still in a rehabilitative state, and how it has impacted our community because we adopted a slogan, El Paso Strong, but our strength comes from the reality that our legislators have an awesome responsibility to make common sense gun legislation, to look at mental health issues, and to provide resources, community-based violence intervention programs. So we've had to deal with a myriad of issues, but I'm grateful to say that Michelle has risen to the challenge. My wife and I, we continue to, in our family, we continue to support her. And because of my work with crime survivors for safety and justice, we hear from other families in our city that are still reeling from the slaughter that happened in our city. But we are determined to continue to press for common sense gun legislation, to make available resources for those who are still suffering, to heal the brokenhearted, and to reach out to the least, the lost, the left out, and the disenfranchised. So we continue to be an advocate for strong policies, limiting access to guns, and all of those issues. But our family continues to gain strength from the hope that this committee is doing now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Pastor Grady. You, Mr. Gutenberg, and so many other survivors deserve justice and action. Madam Chair, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlelady's time has expired.
Madam Chair, I have a unanimous